Story 1. I know you're there. You're watching me, and I can feel it. You're watching my every move, my every step, penetrating the deepest parts of my mind, even if I can't quite tell what you're looking for. But I know you're there, and you're there when I close my eyes. It's like a shadow that follows me into the darkest corners of my mind. You probably feel my fear, my restless mind when I think I'm alone, but in reality, I'm never alone. Sometimes I think I can catch your eye when I'm crossing an empty street or standing in the rain, but when I try to turn around, you're gone. You're not just watching, you're learning, watching my reactions, how I live, how I breathe, how my thoughts get tangled up in their own labyrinths. At first it was strange, like a nightmare you can't quite understand, but with each passing day I grew more accustomed to it. I feel you moving along the edges of my consciousness, your thoughts sliding over me like a tattoo on my skin, leaving no trace, but always there. You are not just a presence, you are a part of this world, a part of what I cannot change. You are an extension of what has long been hidden behind my eyes, what was never meant to be revealed. It seems to me that you are searching for something. You want to find an answer, to understand what exactly you are looking for, what motivates you to follow me. And here begin the questions that I cannot answer. What do you really want from me? I am not sure. Maybe you are trying to understand me. Maybe you are just studying how I exist, but you know more than I do. Or at least, so it seems to me. When I think about it, I feel cold. Cold in the sense that you envelop me, giving me no warmth, no peace. It's not a physical cold. It's not a frost that penetrates the body. It's a deeper feeling, like every brave breath I take touches you, and you know that you control me, that you keep me on the edge. You don't make me move, you don't make me do anything, you just watch. You just are, and that's enough to make me feel uncomfortable, to know that I'm not alone. It's hard for me to understand what you are. At first I thought it was just my imagination, just paranoia caused by stress or fatigue. But every day I become more and more convinced that you are not just an imagination. You are real, and you have influenced everything around me in one way or another. You become a part of this world, a part of everything that happens, and perhaps you will even control it. You do not just observe, you change the world around you. I feel you trying to penetrate me, studying my every move. You see me losing confidence, doubting myself, trying to find my purpose in this world. But you don't give me peace. You make me feel like I can't choose my path, like I'm under your gaze, like a microscope, and my every move will be noticed. You don't tell me anything directly. You don't interfere. But your presence is much more than just observation. When I walk the streets, I feel you, but I can't quite place you. Your gaze follows me, penetrates my thoughts. Sometimes I begin to doubt that the world around me even exists. Maybe this is all just a dream, and you are a creature of my own thoughts, part of something I can't control. Or maybe this is not a dream. Maybe I am just alone in this world, where you become my only companion. Your movements, your attention to my thoughts, all of this has become part of my existence. I cannot shake the feeling that you are observing me not just as an alien being, but as something much deeper, as something that feeds my doubts and fears. You remain there beyond my understanding, and it seems you will never leave. You are like a whirlwind that never stops spinning. At some point, I tried to hide from you. I closed my eyes, went into the forest, walked along dark alleys to somehow obscure your gaze. But every time I tried to hide, I realized that it was useless. You were always there, beyond my eyes, on the edge of my mind, giving me neither peace nor liberation. You are not someone you can see. You are not someone you can catch. You are something intangible that penetrates the very depths of my thoughts, filling them, pushing me to new questions, to new doubts. And now, I can't stop. My thoughts keep returning to you, and I can't understand what you want from me. You watch. You learn. You stay in my head, in my mind, and I don't know what you're looking for there. I wake up, and the first thing I feel is pressure. It's heavy on my shoulders, like someone is sitting on them, quiet, not moving. But I know it's not there. It's just a habit of feeling your presence even when you're not here. You're always out there, always somewhere in the space between my thoughts. And every time I wake up, I feel it, this weight on my shoulders, like you're there, watching. Maybe it's paranoia. Maybe I'm thinking too much, worrying too much, but this feeling, it doesn't go away. It doesn't disappear in the morning. And even when I look in the mirror and try to convince myself that everything is okay, that it's just a dream or a fantasy, I feel you sitting behind me, like a cold gaze sliding down my back, like an invisible hand that touches my consciousness, but I can't grab it. You are not just a shadow. You are not just a presence. You are not just a person hiding in the dark. You are more. You are an unimaginable force penetrating my reality, making me doubt what I see, what I feel. I am starting to think that you are not just an observer. You are a participant. You are a part of this world, this life. And I can't get rid of you. I can't get rid of this feeling that you are near, even when I am alone. I walk around the house, but I feel you with every step, in every rustle, in every sound, in every glance at old photographs. You are there, beyond the edge of my perception, but I know you are here. I cannot deceive myself. I cannot simply forget about it because you are always near. Even when I tell myself that this is just my fantasy, that I create this reality myself, this feeling remains. You haunt me. You permeate my every move. I feel your attention in every step. I try to forget myself in something else, in work, in reading, in music, but it doesn't help. You continue to be here, in my head, not letting me relax. And even when I start to think that I need to stop paying attention to you, you're right there, again and again, reminding me of your presence. You have become a part of my life, a part of something I cannot control. I am trying to understand what you want. Why are you following me? What do you want from me? You are not just following, not just observing my actions. You are studying something, analyzing. Maybe you are looking for a weakness. Maybe you are waiting for the moment when I make a mistake and you can use it against me. I know you won't do anything physical. You won't show up in front of me, knock on my door. You won't act like the others do. You're probably much more subtle. You get into my mind, into my thoughts, making me feel like I'm not alone. You manipulate my emotions, make me doubt myself. You make me feel insecure. I think about the fact that you might be something supernatural. I start searching in books, on the internet, something that would explain all this. Maybe you are a spirit, a ghost, or something like that. But every time I try to find an explanation, I feel how you become even closer, how your thoughts become more and more intertwined with mine. You are not just watching. You become a part of me. You penetrate every part of my mind, and I cannot escape from this labyrinth. I try to escape from you. I go to the woods. I walk in nature. I try to find some kind of shelter from this feeling that you are behind me. But it's no use. You don't disappear. You won't disappear. You are always there, always in my head. And I'm starting to understand that maybe you are not the one who should disappear. It is I who must learn to live with you. I must learn to accept your presence. Learn to be with what you create in my life. I'm beginning to realize that you're not just an observer. You're an active participant in my world. You're watching me because you're probably important to something bigger than I can understand. You're not just a part of my mind, you're a part of this reality. And that knowledge, that thought, is beginning to tear me apart inside. I come home again and I begin to feel your presence even more strongly. I see everything around me begin to change. Nothing stays the same. I begin to understand that maybe I myself have become a part of this world, a part of something bigger that I do not control. And in this understanding, in this awareness, fear appears. Fear that I may not be able to cope with this. Fear that you may have always been there, always controlling my actions, my thoughts. And all that remains is the question, how long can I take this? How long can I go on with my life feeling like you're watching me, like you're living in my head, in my thoughts, in my every move? Maybe I can never get rid of you. Maybe you're a part of me, and I can't escape it. I think this is the beginning. I'm not sure how long it will last or what I really hope to find, but I keep moving. The shadows I feel are getting stronger. You won't let me go, but I can't seem to find a way to loosen your grip. Sometimes I wonder if I stopped. If I just stopped fighting this, would you back off? Or would you still be here watching me slowly lose myself? I remember the day it all started. It seemed like nothing special had happened, just another day filled with empty thoughts and activities, as usual. But something had changed. It was a subtle feeling in the air, like a whisper on the edge of hearing that an ordinary person wouldn't be able to catch, but I heard it. You were there, and you knew it. I knew it. That moment was like the first look in the mirror, where you see not only yourself, but also the one who is hiding behind your eyes. Every day it becomes harder to separate myself from you. I try to figure out where you end and I begin, but you constantly merge with me. And every step I take, every word, every movement seems dictated by something I can't control. I look in the mirror and see a familiar face, but it seems like it doesn't belong only to me. It belongs to you, too. Sometimes when I close my eyes, you are there again. I feel your coldness, how it penetrates me, my thoughts, making them freeze. It is not the fear that comes at night, when you are alone in the dark. It is something more. It is the fear that you cannot leave, that you are always there, that you will always be in my head, penetrating every corner of my consciousness. I try to find a way to break free from this. I turn to books, to teachings, to ancient myths. I think that maybe there is some way to break free from this, as if this were some kind of curse. But every time I try to understand what it is, how it happened, you are always there. I feel you probing my thoughts, absorbing everything I try to understand and changing it, making me doubt again that I know it all. I try to do something, anything, to distract myself. Sometimes I go to work, try to do something that requires my attention, but even then you don't let go. In every action, in every look, I feel your presence. You are here again, watching. You are not just watching me, you have already become a part of my world. You influence my decisions, my steps, how I feel, and this scares me. Every now and then I notice oddities that I hadn't noticed before. It's as if my eyes have begun to see something that wasn't there before. Sometimes it seems like the world around me is changing, but it's not. It's you who are changing it. You interfere with my view, with my perception, and I can't figure out where reality ends and where your manipulations begin. You change me. You make me doubt what I know about myself, about the world, about life. More and more often I feel you creeping into my head, tearing apart everything I once thought was certain. My thoughts are starting to get jumbled, and I can't help but feel like you're controlling me. I try to be strong, but it's getting harder and harder to hold on. You're not just a shadow. You're not just a trace. You're a real, living part of my world, and I can't get rid of you. I want to understand what's going on, but you won't let me. You keep manipulating my thoughts, making me believe things I can't control. I hear your voice in my head even when I don't want to. It whispers to me, coaxing me to believe things I can't understand. And I don't know how much longer I can hold on. I don't know how much longer I can fight this. One day I decide to go back to the place where it all began. There, in the old forest, the place where I first felt your presence. I hope that maybe if I encounter it again, I will be able to understand what is happening. But when I am there, I feel you enveloping me again. The same cold, the same feeling that you are inside me, that you control my thoughts. This place. It's all about this place. I'm starting to realize that you're not just watching me. You're somehow connected to this forest, this space, this time. Maybe you're part of something bigger, part of this reality that I can't control. And then, no matter how hard I try, I realize that I can't leave this place. I can't get out of your circle. I try to escape. I run, but you don't leave me behind. You are not just a presence. You are a part of me. I can no longer separate myself from you. We have become one. You are in my head, in my body, in my heart, and with every step, with every moment, I lose my freedom because you are me and I am you. I understand that you were always there. You were inside me, and now it seems that I can't escape. You are my shadow, and I can't get rid of it. When I look back on everything that happened, I begin to realize that I can't just leave it all behind. You keep watching me. You won't let go, and I can no longer ignore what's going on inside me. My thoughts are all over the place, and no matter how hard I try to focus on something else, you're always there. It's like you've become a part of my mind, a part of me. The longer I stay in this state, the more I feel this world around me changing. It becomes strange, alien, and every step, every glance seems different from what it was before. I increasingly feel as if I have ceased to be the master of my own thoughts. They are not mine. They are yours. Your hand, your gaze, your shadow always follow me, tearing off pieces of my reality. I wandered the same streets, the same roads, and everywhere I went, you were there. You slid around the corners. You followed my every move. At some point, I began to feel that these walls, these roofs, these familiar places no longer had the same meaning. I tried to find something familiar in them, something safe, but everything became alien. All the lines blurred. There was emptiness around me, and the only voice I heard was yours. At some point, I realized that my attempts to hide, to run away, all this was pointless. There was no salvation. I tried to go into the forest, but you were there. I tried to hide in my dreams, but you got there too. You came for me, and now, as it seemed to me, I could no longer hide. Every day my memories became more blurred. I couldn't tell what was real and what was just your game. What was once clear became blurry, like an old photo, damaged by time. I looked at the world, but it was no longer the same. Everything I saw seemed part of your control. My reality was half shattered, and in this chaos I had to try to pick up the pieces to understand what was happening. But the pieces didn't fit. They didn't connect. I felt like you were gone. You weren't physically there, not in the sense of standing in front of me, but your influence was everywhere. You were like something ethereal but real. I felt your thoughts penetrating me, your words not letting go. I was afraid that one day I would wake up and there would be no place to return to. You were tearing apart every piece of me, and I couldn't stop it. I couldn't get rid of it. And so I began to realize that all of this was not just a mind game. You were not just a figment of my imagination. You were part of something bigger, something I could not understand, but which I felt every minute. And with this feeling, I felt a loss of myself, a loss of the world, a loss of meaning, as if I were dissolving into the void, losing my identity. It was not just fear. It was a real nightmare that was taking over me with every step. What was before? I don't remember. When it all started, when I felt your presence for the first time, I was sure that I could survive it. But now it seems that it is no longer possible. You are becoming so real that I can no longer find the boundaries between what I do and what you dictate to me. You are in my every step, in every choice, in every moment of my life. I tried to find answers. I thought that all this was temporary, that with time I would be able to find peace. But with each passing day, you only became stronger. You consumed me, consumed all my thoughts, feelings, and actions. I felt more and more like I was losing control over myself. My own desires, my own thoughts were no longer mine. I saw you standing behind them, watching my every move. There was no turning back. And no matter what I tried to do, you were always there. You were a part of me. And this feeling was unbearable. I could no longer separate myself from you. I could no longer find the point where we stopped being one. At some point, I realized that I can no longer fight this. I can't fight you because you have become a part of me. And now, it seems I no longer know who I really am. Every day I felt like I was losing more than I could afford. I tried to return to my old life, to my old reality, but it was impossible. You're not just watching, you are me. I became part of your world, and you became part of mine. We became inseparable. I was facing something new and scary, the prospect of being lost in what I once knew and becoming someone else. I didn't know what to do, where to go, or how to stop. All I could do was live with it, and maybe it was worse than anything I could have imagined. I have long ceased to notice where my own world ends and the one you create for me begins. Time, which once seemed linear, has now become as fluid as water. I feel its boundaries blurring, getting lost in the darkness you leave behind. It is as if I am standing in the center of some enormous vortex, unable to break this circle. Everything around me is unnatural, and I can no longer distinguish what is truly real and what is the fruit of your influence. I don't understand how you did it anymore, how you penetrated every crevice of my consciousness, filling it with your presence. Every morning I wake up, but the world around me is not the same. It is full of emptiness, filled with your gaze. I can't shake this feeling that you are watching, that you are always there, even when you are not here. As if I became a part of something much more complex than simple existence. You have been around for so long that it is hard to imagine how it was before. But the more I try to think about it, the more I feel this process consuming me. You created a world where my every move seems known to you. You watched how I walk, how I think, how I live. And now it's like I'm in a cage with no way out. I try to remember when this game began, when you first appeared in my thoughts, but it all somehow merges into one foggy mass. When was I free? Or have I always been connected to you? And it's only now that I'm beginning to realize that everything that happened was not my actions, but your hand. At some point, I tried to regain control. I decided that I would no longer follow your rules, that I could break free from this shadow that was growing behind me. But with each step, I realized that you were always not just next to me, but inside me. You became my shadow, a part of me, and with that came the feeling that I was losing myself. I can't go back, because I am not who I used to be. I tried to look for answers, tried to understand what you want from me, but every question, every answer I gave myself only confused me more. You don't answer questions. You don't say what you want. You just are. You're present everywhere. You're this shadow that watches me all the time, and I can't get rid of this gaze. It penetrates my soul, my thoughts, and I no longer know what is mine and what is yours. My steps have become aimless. I walk the same roads, but the world seems strange and alien. Every place I go seems not to be what I once knew. Everything is as if entwined with the threads of your presence. I have ceased to be able to consider this world as mine. It has become yours. You live in it. You are what makes me move, breathe, exist. And I cannot shake this feeling that I have lost my place, my identity. Sometimes I feel like if I stop moving, this world will disappear. I'm afraid of what will be left if I stop looking for a way out. I'm afraid I'll be completely consumed by what you've created. I don't know how long it's been since I started looking for answers, or how much longer I have left, but every moment feels like my last, like I'm standing on the edge, and if I take a step, I'll just disappear. But here's the thing, I'm already disappearing. I'm not who I used to be, and maybe I never was. I understand that you are not just my enemy. You are not just someone who haunts me. You are a part of what I have become. You left me no choice. You have consumed me so much that I can no longer even believe that I was once searching for freedom. Maybe it was just an illusion. I was always yours, and you were always a part of me. This world I've gotten myself into has become something I can't change. I can't go back to the moment when I was free. And all that remains is to keep going, not knowing where or why. I can't separate myself from you because you become my breath, my shadow. You're the one who controls my every step, every thought, every word. I can try to forget about it, I can try to leave, but you will always be there. You will be in my every move, in my every choice. You are what has swallowed me up, and I can no longer get out of it. Every movement, every look, every step, all this is just a continuation of what you have created. In the end, I realize that no matter how much I try to escape, you are here. You have always been here. And now it seems I will have to live with this, perhaps for the rest of my life. Story 2, I will not give my name. Let this story be just an excuse for me to spill out everything I have experienced over the past few months. I arrived in Appalachia about 6 months ago, completely unaware of what awaited me. My head was filled with images from books and movies about wild mountains, ancient forests, and lonely watchtowers standing on the edge of the world. In reality, everything turned out to be somewhat simpler. However, no less disturbing. I am 32 years old, and I work in the wilderness, far from people, at one of the highest posts in this area. My job is to monitor the forest, their condition, and if something unusual happens, to report it immediately. It would seem like a simple job, if not for one but loneliness. It's as if you found yourself in another world where every sound seems alien and time stretches to infinity. Every night, sitting in my tower, I feel this loneliness with my whole being. It's like an invisible weight that presses on my chest and doesn't let me breathe calmly. Today was one of those days when everything was going as usual. It was hot. The humidity in the air was so thick that it felt like the entire surface of your clothes was one big wet rag. The air was stagnant, and you felt its weight on you, as if it could squeeze you at any moment if you held your breath. I woke up around 9 in the morning, made myself a cup of coffee and sat in silence, listening to the river gurgling in the distance. It seemed like no different from the previous days. My working day started at 10 in the morning and didn't end until 11 at night. I spent the whole day in the tower, recording data, reading a book, making the necessary reports. Sometimes I received messages from colleagues at other stations on the radio, but that was rare. Sometimes I walked in the surrounding forests, but in recent weeks I tried not to go far, and frankly I didn't want to. This strange feeling haunted me from the very beginning, the feeling that if I went too far I would not be able to return. And so, as usual, at 11 o'clock in the evening, I called the team leader to report on my shift. He, as always, wanted to know if everything was okay, if I had noticed anything unusual. I said that everything was fine, there were no fires, no strange tracks in the forest, No signs of animals that could disturb the locals. He wrote it down and thanked me. It was a standard part of my day. We didn't even talk about anything else, as if I was just another link in the chain and nothing else mattered. After talking to the boss, I returned to my tower. I took a seat at the table and opened the book one had started reading a few days ago. At that moment, it seemed to me that time had slowed down. I was lost in the lines, in the words, in a world that seemed much more real to me than the tower itself. But then, less than 5 minutes had passed, I was brought out of my reverie by a bright flash of light. It took me a while to realize what had happened. Everything was calm. I was sitting in my chair, absorbed in my book, and suddenly a flash. It was so bright that I almost flew out of my chair. I didn't have time to process what had happened, but looking through the window, I realized that the light was coming from the north, where the forest was shrouded in darkness. It was strange. I couldn't explain what it was. Lightning? But could lightning be that bright? Or something like a UFO? I didn't know. I stood up and went closer to the window, trying to understand what was happening. In the darkness, I couldn't see anything except the outlines of the trees and the moonlight that illuminated their crowns. After standing there for a few minutes, I decided to check what was going on around me. Maybe I hadn't noticed something. Perhaps it was some kind of phenomenon. I turned on the radio and tried to call the neighboring station, 3 Towers. My interlocutor answered after a few seconds and asked what had happened. I told him about the flash. He said he hadn't seen anything and suggested that it was probably just my imagination. He thought I was tired and had simply mixed something up. This could well be true, because in conditions like these, it's easy to lose touch with reality. I still couldn't understand what had happened. Returning to the window, I tried to see something in the darkness again, but saw nothing. I opened the door, went outside, searched the area around the tower, but everything was empty. I even thought that perhaps my own imagination had played a cruel joke on me. When I got back inside, I tried to forget about it again, but the strange feeling wouldn't go away. I closed the door and locked it, getting ready for bed. The thought was running through my head that maybe this was just the result of the loneliness I had brought upon myself. I took off my shoes, climbed into bed, and soon fell asleep, forgetting everything that had happened. But the feeling that something was wrong did not leave me. I lay in the darkness, listening to the sounds of the night, and felt anxiety gripping my soul, as if something invisible was watching me from the very depths of the night. When I woke up the next morning, I felt something strange inside me, almost a physical tension, as if the night had left an invisible mark on me. I slowly opened my eyes and looked around the room. My tower was the same as yesterday, just as quiet and calm. Only the soft morning sun was shining through the window, barely penetrating the thick fog. Inside me, there was no desire to get up and go about my business. I felt somehow tired, although I could not understand why. I stood up as usual, made myself a cup of strong coffee, and sat down by the window. The wind was fresh, although the humidity had not abated. The river below, covered in morning fog, remained in its usual state, as did everything around. But something was wrong. I could not shake the feeling that I was not alone here, despite the fact that there was no one else in the area. I sat and drank coffee for a long time, absorbed in these thoughts, not noticing how time was passing. As always, I was in no hurry to get back to work. I opened my journal, wrote down my thoughts, but the thoughts were confused, fragmentary. They returned to the flash of the night, that light, those feelings. I still could not understand what it was. It could not be that it was just my brain, overwhelmed by loneliness and fatigue. I knew that these were not just fantasies. I was not mistaken. This was something real. New questions arose in my head, to which there were no answers. What could it be? Why couldn't I find an explanation? I looked out the window again, but this time something else caught my attention. On the glass of the door, directly in front of me, I saw a strange imprint. It was so similar to a handprint, but very unusual. It was dark in color, almost black, as if it had been left by something that looked more like coal or soot. It took me a moment to realize what it was. At first I thought it might be dirt, or perhaps I had accidentally left the mark myself. But something inside me told me it wasn't. I walked up to the door and looked closely. The print was fresh, its edges were clear, and the soot itself seemed to have no texture. It didn't look like a normal fingerprint. It seemed to blend into the surface of the glass, as if it were part of the door itself. I felt a strange sense of unease. My heart began to beat faster. I started looking around the room, checking if I had accidentally left a mark without noticing. But no, I knew for sure that the night before, after I had returned to the tower, I had not touched the glass. I could not find any explanation for this, unless someone had been here before me. But that was simply impossible. I was alone in the tower, and there was nothing around for someone to come so close without leaving a mark. Not knowing what to do, I decided to check the radio. I contacted 3 Towers, as usual, to report my find. To be honest, I didn't expect anyone to believe me. He listened to me with interest as always, but I sensed doubt in his voice. He said that I probably just hadn't noticed the print before. He insisted that it was probably an old one that I hadn't seen before. But I knew that wasn't true. I clearly remembered leaving the tower yesterday. The windows were clean, and there was nothing like it. After I finished the conversation, I stood in front of the door, almost not knowing what to do. Strange thoughts were spinning in my head, and the feeling that something was wrong continued to haunt me. I still could not justify what was happening, because at that moment one thing was absolutely clear. Someone was nearby, Someone was in this tower, even if I did not see it. I looked around. Nothing had changed. The forest, covered in fog, still stood motionless. But it was only an external calm. A feeling of anxiety was growing inside me. Time passed, and I sat there, trying to understand what was happening to me. Perhaps I was thinking too much. Perhaps all this was just the result of loneliness, or maybe some old fear of mine. But something about this imprint made me nervous. The day went on as usual. I kept feeling the presence of something invisible, but I decided that I would simply ignore it. It was the only way to stay sane. I continued to take notes, check my equipment, monitor the condition of the forest, but every time I entered my tower, I couldn't help but look at the glass, and every time there was that imprint. Its black trace became more and more obvious and unbearable. I couldn't shake the thought that it was there for a reason. It couldn't be an accident. When evening came, I made my usual call to my superiors, reporting the state of affairs. After that, I decided to leave all my fears outside the tower and try to continue living as usual. But every movement, every step in this house, even a simple noise made me shudder. I still could not understand what had happened during the night, and I could not get rid of the anxiety that these events were only the beginning of something much more terrible. And so, when night fell, I felt that strange cold in the air again. That same cold that you only feel when something invisible is next to you watching. Again, something heavy lay on my heart. I closed my eyes, trying to sleep, but there was a restlessness in my soul that did not go away. Night came, as it always did, bringing with it the same silence, broken only by the soft rustling of the leaves in the forest. I sat in my tower, lost in thought, but the longer I was alone, the more uneasy I felt. Something about this place was making me restless. With each passing night, I felt the nature around me becoming alien, as if the forest itself was becoming part of something much larger and darker. Something about this place was wrong. I had long since stopped paying attention to the strange phenomena that happened around me. But now, as time went on and these events became more frequent and inexplicable, I began to feel something shift in the very air, as if reality itself were slipping over the edge. I tried to remain calm, but one thing was increasingly bothering me: the same imprint on the glass of the door, the same dark trace that did not disappear. I was sure that no one could have left it. Why was it not there when I was not at work, and then reappearing every time I returned? It was really starting to bother me. I went to the window again and peered into the night. The forest was engulfed in darkness, but the moonlight faintly illuminated the trees, creating strange shadows that seemed to move on their own. At one point, I thought I saw something dark, something fast and stealthy, sliding between the trees, but perhaps it was just a play of light and shadow. With each passing moment, my eyes became more and more wary, and I felt as if something invisible was watching me. The next morning, when I opened my eyes again and stood up, the fog was as thick as ever. It seemed like nothing had changed, but this time I felt different. Thoughts kept spinning in my head that maybe I was just paranoid and had been alone for too long. However, the more I realized, the more obvious it became that this fear was not just a figment of my imagination. I walked around the tower, checking its condition. It hadn't changed outwardly, but I felt the air around me become denser, as if the tower itself was filling with something elusive and strange. I decided to walk around the grounds a bit, hoping to relieve some of my tension. But as soon as I stepped outside the tower, I felt a chill. It was strange, as if the temperature had suddenly dropped, and despite the warmth in the air, I could feel the chill piercing me. I kept walking, but then, turning around, I suddenly stopped. At the foot of the stairs leading to the tower, I noticed footprints. They were deep imprints left by something heavy, as if someone had passed through there during the night. But strangely, the tracks were pointing straight into the forest, not towards the tower. I stood there, wondering what this could mean, but they were so clear that I felt uneasy. Right after that, I returned to the tower, feeling the cold again, which now seemed denser. As I stepped inside, my heart pounded in my chest again. I closed the door and hurried to my desk, trying to distract myself from these thoughts. But as soon as I started working, there was a noise outside. It was something heavy, like someone was carrying something along the ground. Footsteps, several heavy steps, getting closer and closer. My mind immediately switched to ready for action. I stood up, crept to the window, and looked outside, but it was empty. Nothing, just a dark forest covered in fog. I felt my heart freeze in my chest, and my skin broke out in a cold sweat. I didn't even understand where the noise was coming from. Perhaps it was an illusion. It was possible. But something inside me told me that this was not just a coincidence. Yet, no matter how hard I tried to focus, my thoughts kept returning to those footsteps. Suddenly, it became clear to me the footsteps were too heavy to be ordinary people. They sounded as if they were being made by something much more massive than a person. Someone or something that should have passed unnoticed. Late that night, I made the decision that I had to stay awake again. I didn't want to go to sleep without knowing what was going on. I kept feeling like someone was watching me, as if I wasn't alone. I listened to every rustle, every sound. Every now and then, I thought I heard the footsteps again, fast and heavy. But when I went out to the perimeter of the tower, everything was quiet, empty. At one point, I had to sit in the dark, trying to sort out my feelings. None of this seemed real. But then why couldn't I shake this feeling that something was wrong? Why did the footsteps keep sounding in my head, even if I didn't actually hear them. It was a nightmare that went on and on, giving me no peace. In the morning, as before, I got up, but now, instead of feeling refreshed and ready for another day's work, I felt exhausted. I looked around and I was still tormented by the same question. What is going on here? Why am I staying here if I understand more and more that something is wrong here? I sat in the tower, motionless, staring out the window at the forest, hidden under a thick layer of fog. It seemed that every day brought something new, and this was no exception. The wind died down and the air became especially heavy, as if something invisible was enveloping my body, penetrating every cell. I tried to concentrate on my work, but my thoughts returned again to those strange events that were becoming more frequent and frightening with each passing day. The last incident with the footsteps on the stairs kept running through my head. It was so ridiculous that it was hard to believe it was even possible. How could I have heard such footsteps if no one was around? Why was I the only person in this place? And what the hell was really going on around me? Fear became my constant companion. I tried to push these thoughts out of my mind, forcing myself to believe that I was simply alone for too long, that it was all the result of stress and fatigue. But no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't shake the feeling that someone was watching me. The evening had arrived as usual, dark and silent, with thick shadows creeping into every corner. I had just finished my last mark on the record and was getting ready for bed. It was about 11 o'clock at night, and the tower was as quiet as usual. But suddenly a strange feeling came over me. There was something different in the air, something unfamiliar and eerie. I couldn't quite describe it. I went out onto the balcony, hoping that the fresh air would dispel this strange feeling. The moon was full, its light silvering the surface of the forest, but out there in the shadows everything seemed alive. I looked at the trees, and for a moment it seemed to me that they were moving. It was absurd, just a play of shadows, but something in those movements made me feel unbearably uneasy. I went back into the tower, closed the door again, and turned on the radio, hoping to talk to my colleague on the other side to distract myself from my thoughts. But as soon as I put the receiver to my ear, I felt a sudden attack of anxiety. Suddenly, for a few moments, I heard something strange, a strange buzzing noise. It was barely audible, but still noticeable. I froze listening. The noise seemed to come from the forest, as if something or someone was moving in its shadow. I turned off the radio and peered into the darkness, but nothing was visible, only the dark silhouettes of trees, and everything seemed absolutely calm. I shook my head again, trying to get rid of the intrusive thoughts. I walked into the other room that served as my workspace and began sorting through papers, trying to nest my thoughts in something meaningful so I wouldn't fall into panic. Suddenly, there was a strange sound, faint but distinct. Someone was scratching at the glass as if fingers were drawing a long line across its surface. I froze, unsure of what to do. I couldn't believe it could be a person because I was alone. There was no one in sight outside, but the sound continued, and I realized I couldn't ignore this feeling of unease. I couldn't just shut the world out again. Something was happening, and I didn't know what. I walked out onto the perimeter of the tower, slowly, carefully, with my heart pounding in my chest. Looking around, I saw that the night silence still reigned around me. I went closer to the glass doors and pressed myself against them, listening. The glass was cold to the touch, and this coldness made me even more uncomfortable. I put my hand on the door handle, but before I could open it, the fog in the forest seemed to move in my direction. I couldn't say exactly what it was, but it looked as if nature itself was moving and giving a signal. I quickly returned to the room and closed the doors, but the strange feeling did not go away. I didn't feel like sleeping, so I sat at the table again, trying to force myself to focus on the books, but my thoughts kept returning to the night and what I had just felt. What if all this was true? What if this place really wasn't empty? What if the fog and the dark shapes weren't just my imagination, but something real waiting for me to let my guard down? The same question was pulsing in my head, but there was no answer. I listened to the night forest again. Now the sound was a little louder footsteps, exactly the same as last time. Heavy, confident. They were getting closer, but this time I didn't want to check what it was. I knew I wouldn't dare look. Instead, I stayed in the tower, surrounded only by my fear, which did not leave me for a minute. It was an agonizing weight. Every sound seemed more than just noise. Every rustle was a sign that something was wrong in this place. I felt like I just couldn't stay here, but leaving wasn't an option. I didn't know why, but I was here, and only fear kept me in place. I waited. But the longer I sat, the more I felt this fear become more and more real. And if before I could convince myself at least a little that all these strange phenomena were a figment of my imagination, now I knew that I would not be able to find an explanation for what I felt. Suddenly, the steps came again. This time I couldn't doubt their reality. It was something big, moving at an incredible speed. But when I looked around, everything was dark and empty. I was sitting alone, but at that moment, loneliness became the most terrible thing I had ever experienced. Several days passed, but nothing changed. I continued my work, sitting for hours in the tower and trying to ignore this ever-increasing fear that was slowly but surely beginning to take hold of me. Sometimes I thought that I felt this fear not only at night, but also during the day, when I simply looked out the window and tried to concentrate on my work. I could not shake the feeling that something was nearby, something invisible and dangerous, watching me. And every day these feelings became more and more real. At night, when silence fell, every sound seemed to grow louder, as if disturbing the peace of the place. The shadows grew longer, as if the very trees by the window were beginning to move toward me, gathering into something I could not understand. I sat at the table, barely moving, unable to tear myself away from this restless state. This fog that did not leave the ground became my constant companion, filling my head with vague thoughts and worries. But it was not only the fog that I felt, it was something else, something I could not explain in words. It was a feeling that I was missing something important was slipping away from my understanding, as if something wanted to touch me but did not want me to see it. I stood by the window and looked out at the forest. It was dark and vast, and the moonlight filtering through the leaves gave it an ominous quality. I felt the hairs on the back of my neck stand up again as I glanced at one spot in the forest where something was moving. It wasn't just a leaf blown by the wind or an animal slowly crawling along the ground. I knew it, I felt it, but when I looked closer, everything was back to normal. The forest was quiet and still again. I began to doubt my perception. Maybe I was just tired, too tired and afraid. But something was wrong in this forest. Something was hidden, and I couldn't find it. That night I was left sleepless again. The sounds of the forest, which had once seemed ordinary, now became threatening. Every rustle was like a harbinger of something greater. I didn't know what to expect, but I felt that something was wrong. The forest had always been full of life, but now it seemed as if something sinister had taken up residence there, something that awakened with the coming of night. Somehow, it didn't dare show itself in the light, but was always there, in the very shadows. I decided to go outside to clear my head. At the very least, I needed to find some normalcy in this strange and disturbing place. I went out onto the porch of the tower and looked into the fog. It was thicker than ever. The fog that usually only slightly covered the ground now seemed alive, reaching out to me, absorbing everything around me. This feeling became so acute that I thought, if I go out into this fog, I will lose touch with reality. But I had to at least try to get rid of the feeling that I was being followed. I took a few steps towards the forest, but as soon as I went deeper into the fog, it seemed as if the world around me was beginning to disappear. Everything became strange and blurry, as if the world around me was beginning to dissolve, leaving only emptiness. My heart began to beat faster, and I stopped abruptly. This fog was not as I knew it. It was like a barrier, like a wall, through which I could not pass. I tried to go back, but when I turned around, I noticed that the forest was not there. Where the trees had just stood, there was now nothing but a gray void in which I was drowning. My legs buckled, and I realized that I had gone too far. I stood alone in this eclipse and did not know what was happening. Trying to bring myself back to reality, I took a step back. But when I returned to the forest, it seemed to me that I was not in the place where I had started my journey. There was nothing familiar around me. Everything was distorted, as if I had found myself in some other world where the laws of nature were different. I stood in complete confusion, not knowing what to do. Every attempt to return to the path was futile, because I could not find the very moment from which I had started. I looked up and saw a light in the distance. It was weak and dim, as if someone was carrying a torch in the distance. My heart started beating faster when I noticed that the light was not getting closer, but moving away, as if someone was simply passing by, not paying attention to me. I stepped to the side, trying to figure out what the light was, but it did not get any brighter, as if it was just a mirage. A moment later, the light disappeared. I was back in total darkness, with only fog and emptiness surrounding me. I turned around and ran back again, trying to find my way, but it was gone. I was trapped, surrounded by this strange world, where nothing felt familiar. The forest, the road, the tower, all of it was gone. There was nothing left but gray fog and empty space. Then I realized, I can't get out. I'm stuck in this place, in this nightmare, and the more I fight it, the deeper I sink into it. When I woke up the next morning, I felt as if nothing had changed, although I knew that everything around me had become different. The fog still hid the ground, and it seemed to me that with each passing minute its density was increasing, engulfing all living things. I stood up, and despite the feeling of uneasiness, went to the window to see what was happening outside the tower. The outside world was still hidden under a layer of thick gray fog. It seemed to have no end or beginning, and the air itself was heavy and humid as never before. I took a deep breath, trying to find some peace. But the more I tried to ignore the strange atmosphere, the more I felt like this place wasn't what it used to be. It wasn't just a feeling, it was a feeling of being trapped, a trap I couldn't explain. I looked around, trying to find a familiar face, a comforting sight, but all I saw was this fog. One evening, as I sat by the window, looking out at the lifeless world beyond, I noticed a movement in the fog. It was faint, as if someone or something was moving slowly through that thick gray screen. I looked more closely, but the figure, if it was a figure, quickly disappeared. It was indistinct, and the movement itself gave me a strange feeling that I had become part of something that was completely beyond my control. Someone or something was watching me, but it was so complicated, so hard to explain, that I did not even dare to think about it seriously. I felt a chill run down my spine, and I couldn't shake the feeling that nothing around me was real. Even the tower itself, which had once been a kind of shelter to me, now seemed a strange and cold place, filled not only with sounds, but with something deeper. All I did was watch the clock, day after day, noticing that it was becoming more difficult. The task that had once seemed simple now became a burden, heavy and unbearable. The fog was becoming more and more intrusive, preventing me from leaving the tower, preventing me from seeing beyond the horizon, beyond what I considered safe. It was seeping into my thoughts, into my perceptions, changing my perception of this place, making me feel like I was trapped somewhere. And this feeling, this understanding that I couldn't escape it, was becoming more and more real. Sometimes I thought I saw a light in the fog, a faint glow that appeared for a few moments and disappeared again. Sometimes it seemed like it was just the light of a fire, but I knew there shouldn't be a fire in this forest. It was too quiet, too calm. Every evening, after I sent another report to my boss and closed the door to the tower, I felt the fog around me growing thicker, as if it were trying to get in. I would sit by the window, trying to see through that wall of gray air, but all I could discern was a sheet of nothing. When I tried to open the window and look outside, the fog would fill the space in the room as if it were alive. It seemed to grow, to wrap itself around everything. I would quickly close the window and walk away from it, feeling helpless before this invisible enemy. I couldn't stay in the tower any longer. I needed to get out, maybe walk the perimeter, to calm myself down. But as soon as I stepped through the door, I felt that gaze on me. It wasn't physical, but it was felt deep in my soul. It was dark and insistent, as if someone was hiding in the fog, watching me. The entire forest seemed to be waiting, frozen under the weight of that atmosphere. I moved forward, towards the forest, hoping to find some path that would lead me out of this nightmare. But the further I went, the more I felt this emptiness begin to swallow everything around me. The fog grew thicker and thicker, and soon I could no longer even see my hands in front of me. I moved at random, stepping into the empty unknown, and yet, despite the feeling of fear, I continued to walk, as if someone or something was pulling me along. When I suddenly heard footsteps, I froze. They weren't my footsteps. Someone was nearby. I froze in place, straining my ears, but I heard nothing. I tried to move on, but fear paralyzed me again. Every movement, every sound now seemed suspicious. I stood in this fog, not knowing what to do. I couldn't understand what was happening. Everything was so strange that I stopped trusting my senses. Maybe I had lost touch with reality a long time ago. I took another step and immediately felt someone grab my hand. My eyes widened in horror, but when I looked to the side, I saw nothing. There was no one. No hand, no figure, only this damn fog. I quickly looked around, trying to figure out what had happened, but I felt like I was stuck. There was nothing but me behind the wall of gray space, and I no longer knew what was real and what was a lie. With each passing day, I felt the reality around me becoming more and more shaky, as if I were on the border between the world of the living and something else, unknown, dark. The fog did not leave my tower, and its thick curtain increasingly engulfed the space. It became part of my world, as if I had become its inhabitant, and not just a witness. Every morning began with me trying to get through this fog, but despite all my efforts, the world outside the window became more and more alien. The forest disappeared, the houses disappeared, and only a wall of gray milk remained. I could not understand what was happening. Was this some consequence of my loneliness? Or had this world really changed? One morning, I woke up and felt that something was wrong again. My body felt heavy, like it was filled with lead, and every movement was difficult. I sat on the edge of the bed, trying to collect my thoughts, but I could not remember what had happened during the night. My consciousness was foggy, like this world itself, as if I had woken up not in my own body, but in some other one, far from reality. I did not know how much time had passed, but in my head there was only one question: what happened to this place? As I tried to stand up, I noticed that the light in the room had become dim. The light bulb on the ceiling barely illuminated the room. I looked out the window. The fog was dark, almost black. Something was sparkling in it. Something was moving. Maybe it was just my eyes, which had finally tired of the nightmares, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I was surrounded by something much more dangerous than just fog. In that moment, I realized I was not alone. The outside world, this forest, this place, was not just dark, it was alive, and it was watching me. My mind was in a panic. I grabbed the phone and tried to call. The connection was lost. I tried to turn on the radio, dead silence. No messages, no sounds, just emptiness. This feeling intensified when I opened the door of the tower. The fog was everywhere, as before, but now it was not just a strange phenomenon. It was a living, breathing thing that seemed to consume everything around it. I stepped outside, and this air, this fog, squeezed me like a vice. I tried to move, but the steps I took didn't sound like they should. The sound was muffled, as if I was walking through nothing. I couldn't see anything around me. My reality was now divided. I was in the world, but also outside it. I couldn't find a way out. I walked, but the direction didn't matter. I was trapped in this relentless circle, with no end in sight, no beginning. Suddenly I heard a rustling sound, thin, barely perceptible footsteps. I froze, trying to understand what it was. The sense of a presence became so real that I felt the hair on the back of my neck stand on end. More footsteps. Or was it my imagination? Maybe it was just the wind wandering through the trees, or maybe it was my mind playing tricks, but I was almost certain that those footsteps were approaching me. It was not just empty silence. It was something more, something sinister, something alien. I froze and held my breath, waiting for the next thing to happen. Everything seemed so unreal. The fog around me had become thicker, and now I couldn't see a single tree, couldn't discern the tracks I was leaving. Everything was erased. I was one with this fog, and this world seemed to be as I perceived it, full of emptiness and fear. I continued walking, not knowing what to look for or where to go, but suddenly something in the fog changed. The outside world became familiar again. I felt something flash in front of me, a faint light. I looked up and immediately knew it was not just a glow, but something more familiar. The moon, but not the usual moon. It was covered in what looked like dark shadows. It shone brighter than usual, but the light was cold and alien. This was not the world I knew. This was another place, a place where the fog and the moon intertwined into something supernatural. I came closer. My steps were not so heavy now, and the space around me began to change. It seemed to crack, to fall apart, and to shrink again. I tried to move forward, but I realized that this world was not the world I knew. It was a world where the boundaries of reality were erased, and I was a prisoner. The fog around me wasn't just an atmospheric phenomenon. It was a living thing, a thing that had taken hold of me. I felt its presence all around me. I couldn't believe it, but for a moment I thought I could hear its thoughts. They were quiet, subtle, but real. It was the feeling of someone peering into me, something watching, something dangerous, something with intentions I couldn't understand. My heart began to beat faster. I stood on the edge of reality, in a place where everything was possible, but nothing was clear. My mind was filled with anxiety, and I felt myself being pulled deeper into this unknown, dark void. Story 3, it was 2:47 a.m., and I didn't know why I was standing at this bus station. It wasn't like I wasn't expecting to be here. I had nowhere to go, to see anyone. But here I was. Time dragged on like heavy raindrops on glass. It was dark, with only the dim light of the street lamps casting a faint glow on the peeling tiles. The place looked abandoned, frozen, like someone had pulled it out of time, leaving it to rot and decay in some pocket dimension. There were no cars or people on the horizon, only the occasional patch of fog that seemed like dim silhouettes sliding along the ground. It felt like I was the only living thing in this place, and even though I was standing there, the feeling that I wasn't really here didn't leave me. This feeling of emptiness was slowly becoming more and more familiar. I felt uncomfortable. I was nervous. I brushed a few drops of rain from my face, which had begun unnoticed as soon as I stepped in. Puddles on the sidewalk began to fill, reflecting the occasional lights like little stars. It was damp inside, and smelled faintly of something sweet, sour, and strange. It was a smell I couldn't identify, but it made me feel uneasy. A warm smell of soda, mold, and something rotten, like jelly beans. The whole atmosphere seemed to suck the energy out of me, stretching the space around me. At the bus stop itself was an old vending machine. It didn't look like anything that belonged here. It seemed considerably older than everything else around it. The glass on the front was cracked and warped, and a faint light flickered from within. I walked closer. It was strange. The buttons were unmarked. The screen was static, as if the machine itself were some kind of glitch, an error in space and time. There was nothing familiar about it, nothing that made it seem normal to this place. The packages, visible through the warped glass, didn't have the brands we were used to. I stood there, staring at the strange inscriptions that didn't make sense at first glance. They seemed to be playing with my mind, whispering peanuts, bitter chewing gum, bites of regret, grandma's wet mints. Each package had something on it that I couldn't understand, but something about them was compelling. I took a step back, my mind trying to catch something familiar, something from those memories that I might have left somewhere deep inside. Each of these inscriptions reminded me of fragments of old dreams. I remembered how often in my dreams I encounter something invisible, elusive, but always strangely familiar. I quickly turned away from the machine, but something still pulled me back. I don't know why I did it. I reach into my pocket, pull out $1, and without thinking, insert it into the slot. I couldn't stop myself, as if something in my head was whispering, "Do it." Somehow my finger ended up on the B7 button. It was abnormally tight, as if it were resisting my decision. The machine made a sound that was impossible to describe, only wet, deep, somehow biological. It spat out a bag and I took it. The bags, like the machine, had no logos or familiar symbols, just a dim light that faintly reflected something forgotten. When I opened the package, I realized that I wasn't holding the usual chips or candy. These were thin, crisp flakes that glistened as if they had just been pulled out of some kind of oil. They looked like potato chips, but had a strange metallic sheen, as if they were made of something else. I clutched one in my hands, deciding to try it. As soon as I put it on my tongue, I felt a strange reaction. It was not what I expected. At first it was unbearably sweet, and then the taste became burning, like a burn, but not physically. It was a burn of consciousness. I suddenly felt how the surrounding space began to shrink, as if it became less real, and everything around me lost its meaning. I wanted to close my eyes, but an unknown force held me back. Everything went dark in one moment. And then I heard a whisper, not in my ears, behind my eyes. It was like an unknown language, one I didn't know, but one I could understand. The whisper said to me, "Don't look in the mirror in the train station bathroom after 3:13 a.m. He's watching." I froze, unsure of what to do. My hands were shaking, and I looked down. The bag was empty. I hadn't eaten more than one chip, but everything about the place seemed distorted. Everything was different again. Something was pulling me back to the machine. I pressed a 8. Not realizing what I was doing. This time, a package of grandma's wet mints fell out. They looked like they had been stitched together with baby hair. They were wet, soft, warm, Each candy glistened, as if there was something stranger inside than just sugar. When I tried to unwrap the package, I noticed writing on it that was impossible to ignore. Eat 1 if you miss someone who died. Eat 2 if you want them back. Eat 3 if you're ready to join in. I pulled one out, but I couldn't stop. With each bite, I felt the memories begin to blur, become alien and forgotten. But the scariest thing was that it was not what I thought. My feelings began to distort. My vision became cloudy, and then I realized that I was not just looking at a machine gun. I was starting to look at myself, but through someone else's eyes. My hands were shaking again. I didn't know how to get out of this, but the feeling that I was trapped was getting stronger. Everything that had happened before became like a nightmare from which I couldn't wake up. Here at this station, I felt like a prisoner, but I didn't know how to get out. I was still standing at the machine, but the world around me seemed different now. It wasn't the same as before. It was alien. The familiar bus station was now a dark, shaky place where the laws of time and space no longer applied. I couldn't understand why it was so hard to breathe, why my body suddenly felt so unreal. The sound of the raindrops falling, the distant clatter of cars, it was all gone. All that was left was this empty, soulless station, and me, standing in the center of this enclosed space, unable to move. The machine stood before me as before. I looked again at its distorted glass, at the dim light that barely illuminated its contents. No logos, no familiar snacks. Everything was alien and strange. I tried to remember when and why I approached this machine, but the memories blurred, like an old movie where the frames jump, losing all chronology. At that moment, it seemed to me that all this could just be a dream, a nightmare from which I could not wake up. My gaze slid over the machine's buttons. I couldn't understand why I was drawn to press them again. It was as if forces beyond my control were telling me to do it, and I gave in. First, it was a small movement of my finger, and then a click. I waited. Unconsciously, but I waited for something even stranger to fall out of the machine, and it fell out. A package with writing I couldn't make out. The text on the package shifted, as if the letters were dancing in their places, and I couldn't read them straight. With each glance they changed, and the meaning disappeared. Only some shadow remained, like an unknown message that could not be deciphered by the mind. My fingers shook as I opened the bag. It wasn't food or chips or candy. It was shards of some kind, something that shouldn't be in this world. Tiny, spiky fragments, shiny and fragile. I didn't even understand how they got into my hand, but I was drawn to them, as if they were the only way to understand what was happening. I had just started looking at these pieces when for a moment everything around me changed. A shadow flashed. Or was it just my gaze that became dim? Or was it something else? I felt like the world around me suddenly lost its clarity. With each passing moment, I lost touch with reality, as if I was starting to dissolve into thin air. This moment was so strange and eerie that I began to lose the sense of time. This whole feeling was as if I was in some kind of flow, where every move was predetermined and I could not change the course of events. The forces that forced me to stay here grew stronger, and I looked at the machine gun again. Everything seemed so strange, alien, as if everything around was a living shadow that had jumped out of an old dream. And at that moment I realized that I could not escape. Everything was in the same place in the same time interval, but already different. I could neither leave nor return. I looked at my hands. They were not mine. As if alien to me, they were dirty, worn, alien to everything I knew. I looked down. My pants and shoes weren't the same either, but I couldn't take them off, couldn't leave this world. Everything around me was so abstract and incomprehensible that I forgot why I came here. My soul began to lose strength, as if it was beginning to dissolve in this space, absorbed by its cold emptiness. I looked at the machine again, and it became clear to me, this was not just an accident. This was not just madness. I was not here because I wanted to be here. I was brought here. The machine was not just a mechanism. It was part of something greater, not just objects, not just time. It was part of this terrible emptiness that could stretch me out for years. It was a mirror in which I could no longer see myself. I felt a chill creep up my spine. With every breath I took, I lost touch with reality. I no longer knew where I was or what was happening to me. Everything seemed impossible, alien, not how I was used to perceiving it. I let go of the machine gun and backed away, but every movement only brought me more anxiety. I didn't know how to get out of here, but I knew that I couldn't do it if I continued to hold on to this terrible object. This whole space, this whole station, seemed like some kind of illusion over which I had no control. I turned and walked towards the exit, trying not to look at the machine. I didn't know what awaited me, but I felt like I had no choice. All I could do was move forward without stopping. Time ceased to exist here. When I stepped outside, the world around me became even more unfamiliar. I was in the same place, but it felt different. There were no people or cars around me. Everything was swallowed up by this emptiness, and in its silence I felt how desperate and hopeless I was. The sky seemed too high, the air too heavy, as if the world itself decided that I should not be there. My footsteps echoed in the void. I had followed a road I thought I knew, but now it had taken me to a place I didn't recognize. I tried to remember how I had gotten here, but every step washed away the memories, like water washing away footprints in the sand. I couldn't concentrate. There were no trees or buildings around, just empty, lifeless land that stretched in both directions. I began to notice strange things. My eyes were having trouble focusing. Sometimes I felt like my legs were ceasing to move, as if something invisible was holding me back, forcing me to stop and stare into the darkness. Time seemed different here, too. I didn't know how much time had passed since I'd left the bus station, but it was clear that it had lost all meaning. There was no shadow around me, no light, except the faint glow that came from the street lamps. And even that was fading, as if the night itself was trying to swallow everything up. I stopped, feeling lost in this strange place. With every step, the world became more and more unreal. My eyes became very tense, and I felt my fingers begin to twitch strangely. I needed to stop to collect my thoughts, but I couldn't. I didn't know where to go, and at the same time I felt that some inner voice was pulling me in a certain direction. The steps became more and more hesitant, and the strange feeling of alienation grew stronger. I continued to move forward, almost peering into the fog. Everything around me became less and less clear. I tried to recreate a picture of the familiar world, but like those fragments of memory, everything blurred and disappeared. As I approached the turn, something made me stop. I froze. In the distance, through a thick layer of fog, I saw a silhouette. It was fuzzy, blurry, as if someone was trying to become part of this world but could not. It was something alive. I could not discern its shape, but I felt that it was different. It was something that should not be here. This strange figure stood in the place where I was supposed to go. I started moving towards it. Unconsciously, step by step, I was getting closer, although inside me there was a strong desire to turn away and leave. But something made me move, as if I already knew that I was about to meet this creature. I could not understand what it was. With each passing second, the figure became clearer, but also more terrifying. It was not a creature, but something beyond my understanding. I walked closer. The creature was still standing, its form beginning to take shape, but with each step I could make out less and less of what it was. When I was within arm's reach, the figure suddenly began to disappear, as if it were dissolving into thin air, and everything around me began to melt too. The fog thickened until everything was gone, leaving me in total darkness. I stood there, not knowing where I was. The darkness had enveloped me, and I felt myself being pulled into this emptiness. I couldn't move, I couldn't scream. There was only silence, deep and dull. Suddenly, somewhere in the darkness, I heard a sound, a faint rustling. It came from somewhere behind me, but when I tried to turn around, I realized I couldn't move. I didn't know what was happening, but I knew this wasn't just a mind game. I was trapped, and there was no way I could get out. Before I could even comprehend what was happening, I felt something heavy and cold touch my shoulder. I froze. Every muscle in my body tensed, but I couldn't even move. I knew I was standing in front of something that shouldn't exist in this world. And yet, it was there, right in front of me, watching me in this dark void. There was a feeling inside me that this moment wasn't the end. This wasn't a closure. This was a continuation of something older than anything I knew. A click in my head, and suddenly I realized I was back at that station, at that machine. But I already knew that the world here would never be the same. When I woke up again, this time I found it hard to believe that everything I had experienced had actually happened. Finding myself back at the bus station, I tried to collect all my thoughts. Everything was the same cracked tiles, the dim light from the hanging lamps, the strange smell of soda and mold. But something inside me had changed. I felt like the world around me was the same, but I myself had become a stranger to it. As if I was in a strange body in a strange time. I didn't know what exactly had happened, but inside me there was a strange feeling that something important had been left behind. I couldn't understand what it was. The world I found myself in didn't exist in the categories I was accustomed to. Everything around me was at once familiar and alien, as if reality were just a shell covering something deeper, more frightening. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was still trapped, as if I were physically returning to that strange void. Something was following me. Something was close, but I couldn't explain it. And yet, I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. The sense of unease became almost tangible. I could hear the silence, but it wasn't just emptiness. It was alive, as if the station itself was hiding something. My eyes automatically went back to the vending machine. It was there again, looking completely normal, the same one I'd seen when I'd first come here. The sight of the buttons with the letters and numbers emitting faint static caught my attention again. There was no logo, no markings, just those strange words on the packaging. I felt curiosity ignite inside me again, as if I already knew I had to go back to this machine. I needed to know what was going to happen next. I stepped toward it, my fingers brushing the cold buttons again, whispering peanuts. I knew I shouldn't do this. I knew I shouldn't repeat that experience, but I couldn't stop myself. Something inside me was stronger than any warning. My gaze slid to the packaging again, and I felt my mind momentarily cloud over. I inserted a coin. $1. The machine squeezed it, and after a short sound like wet breathing, another snack fell out, whispering peanuts. I had no doubt that it would be these, even though every instinct in my body screamed at me not to touch the package. I took it and opened it, unable to refuse. The chips looked the same as they had the first time, but now something was different about them. They weren't just chips anymore. I could see them trembling slightly in my hands, as if they were alive, as if they were trying to hide something. I ate one. It wasn't like the normal sensation of eating. No, it was something else, something completely unimaginable. I felt my mind shrinking, as if the world itself was becoming increasingly blurry around me, and I was just a small part of something much larger. I realized that this wasn't just a snack. This was a test. This was a test of sanity and madness. I don't know how much time passed, but I felt a strange energy begin to pulse inside me. My eyes began to widen unnaturally, and I felt the world around me begin to lose shape. I looked at the machine, and everything around me seemed to flow, like paint on a canvas. The lights began to flicker, and the shadows seemed to move on their own. They were reaching out to me, as if I were the center of it all. But when I looked at my hands, I realized that they were no longer my hands. I couldn't believe that all this was happening to him. My fingers began to dissolve, disappear into thin air, as if I were becoming part of this strange, abnormal space. Then I realized that none of this was a coincidence. I hadn't just found myself in some anomalous world. I was part of something. I was in a chain that ran through these machines, through these products, through these strange tests. Everything I did was part of a plan. And the more I tried to understand what was happening, the more I felt that there was something much older than anything I knew. Suddenly the world exploded again, and I found myself back where it all began, the bus station. Everything was the same, but everything was different. I knew I was going back to where I was, but I was a different person. My body felt foreign. My thoughts were confused. I realized I was connected to this place, to this machine, to this world I couldn't understand. I couldn't go back. And I couldn't leave, but I had to understand. I had to go all the way. Something moved heavily inside my pocket. I didn't know what it was, but the feeling of a strange connection with this object didn't leave me. I realized that if I didn't open it now, I would never be able to understand what was really going on. At that moment, the world around me began to change again. I stood there, holding the strange object that had appeared in my pocket, not knowing what it meant, but feeling its importance. As if it were a key that could open the doors to the truth or lead me into even darker depths. I did not dare open it, but I felt that now everything depended on this step. The silhouette I had noticed at the beginning appeared in my mind again. It stood somewhere in the darkness, always beyond the boundaries of my vision, as if it were part of something I could not understand, but which was bound to happen. It was something unimaginable, and every time I tried to look at it, it disappeared. But now, standing here, with this strange object in my hands, I felt its presence becoming more and more tangible. It was close, in the shadows. But I already knew that it was not just a shadow. It was something much more dangerous and ancient. I looked at the object. It was a small box covered in strange symbols that seemed familiar, but at the same time I couldn't read them. It wasn't from the world I lived in, but its presence was undeniable. I looked at it, trying to figure out what to do with it, and at that moment I noticed how the air around me became denser, as if something invisible was squeezing the space around me. Every movement was difficult, as if I was surrounded by invisible forces that were trying to keep me here. I opened the box. Its contents were strange. There was nothing material inside, only a misty glow that swayed slightly, as if alive. It slowly flowed out, becoming part of the air. But in its light, I suddenly felt all my confidence disappear. I became afraid, and I realized that this light was not light. It was absorption. It was beginning to consume me, my entire being, every thought, every feeling. At that moment, I realized I shouldn't have opened that box. I felt myself being pulled into that light, as if I were becoming part of it. I tried to back away, but my feet were rooted to the ground. Fear gripped me, and I felt my understanding of what was happening begin to fade. I stared at the box, and the more I looked into its light, the less real the world around me became. It felt like I didn't exist anymore, like I was part of something much older and more powerful than I could imagine. I tried to concentrate, to force myself to break free, but the more I tried to move, the more I felt like I was losing control. Suddenly, the light disappeared. Everything became dark, but strangely cold. I couldn't breathe, as if the air had become toxic. My skin was burning and my heart was pounding. My head was in complete chaos. I didn't know what was happening, and that was the scariest thing. I closed my eyes and felt a cold, unnatural wind begin to surround me. It wasn't like a normal wind. This wind was foreign, unfamiliar, as if it didn't belong in this world. It whistled, coming out of nowhere, like something that should have disappeared long ago, but for some reason remained. The wind enveloped me from all sides, and I couldn't understand what was happening. It was like an attack, as if shadows had burst from the dark corners of space and were trying to devour me. And then I realized I was not alone. It was not just my fear. It was a shadow that had always been with me, but I did not see it, did not know about it. It was part of this night, part of this world, and now it had come for me. I stood there, not knowing how to fight, how to stop this flow, how to push it back. There was only one thought in my head: to run. But running was useless. I was already caught. I felt something cold touch my hand. I didn't dare open my eyes, but I realized that the shadow that was with me was now trying to take over me completely. It wasn't giving me a chance. I tried to scream, but the sounds I made were hollow and unnatural. It was as if I was trapped in another world, one that had no place for me. And in that moment, I realized that this shadow was not just part of the world. It was its essence, its beginning, and its end. The fate had already been decided. Story 4. I got home late that night. It was already around 10 p.m., and I was still feeling tired from a long event where I barely had time to chat with a few people. It was late, but that didn't stop me from relaxing and spending the evening the way I usually do, with my phone in hand, sitting in my cozy bed, browsing memes on Reddit. No big plans for the night, just a few minutes to get lost in my usual routine, which always managed to distract me from thoughts related to the day. I took a shower, freshened up a bit, and climbed out of the bathroom. The night fog that filled the air couldn't obscure the usual sense of peace that I always felt in such moments. I plopped down in a chair next to my laptop, once again opening a page with new memes and fresh news to kill time before going to bed. I liked spending such evenings. They were like quiet islands in the endless ocean of work and everyday worries. And this time, everything started as usual. I scrolled through the feed, enjoying random memes, funny videos, and discussions on forums. Then I came across an ad. It was weird. Usually the ads were predictable, banal, but this one was different. At the top of the page, among the usual products and services, there was a line with an ad that immediately caught my attention. It said, "Feeling bored lately? Try this new illegal activity." The words illegal and new seemed like someone wanted to grab my attention at the very last minute. I wasn't a reckless person, but that strange wording caught my attention. I felt like something was wrong, but curiosity got the better of me. It was like a click, like someone had pulled an invisible string, and I couldn't resist. I clicked on the link, which rarely ends well, but something about this ad seemed to pull me in. The page loaded, and I found myself on a blank screen. No ads, no information, just a black background with a flashing loading icon. I sat there for a few seconds staring at that screen, not knowing what to think. If I weren't so stubborn, I probably would have closed the tab right away, but I was curious about what would happen next. The loading screen took a long time to disappear. I was starting to lose patience, but I still had that weird feeling that something important might happen. Eventually, it changed and a video appeared on the screen. I looked at the image. It was a backyard. Beige fence, garden plants, one of those places you might see in the backyard of an old house, but not in a way that you would remember for long. It was a completely ordinary, unremarkable yard, filmed with a black and white camera. At first glance, nothing out of the ordinary, but something made me linger. I expected to see some movement or at least hear a sound, but nothing. The yard was empty and everything was silent. I didn't even notice that more than a minute had passed while I was looking at the screen. I just sat there, trying to figure out what was happening. No action, no events. It was just a camera pointed at an empty space. Nothing more. At some point, I thought it was just a weird commercial without meaning, another attempt to attract attention. I was about to close the tab and continue doing my business, when suddenly the words appeared on the screen again. "You want more?" was not the message I expected to see. I saw that the time on the video was still stopped, and the message appeared on the screen again, "Just wait and watch." I didn't know what to think. It was unlikely that this was some kind of virus or a joke, but the strangeness of the situation did not leave me alone. I tried to close the page, but was taken back to the same video. It was getting a little unsettling. I went back to Google to do a search on the matter. I wasn't expecting much information, but I just couldn't stop myself. I typed in weird Google ad showing footage of empty yard. I honestly didn't think I'd find anything useful, but when I hit search, the results were hardly more informative. There were a couple of posts about security cameras not working properly and a few complaints about security glitches. That was it. Nothing useful to explain the weird ad, but when I scrolled further, I saw another ad that caught my attention. The headline was even stranger. "I see you. You see me? We are a relative and I know what you want." I didn't know what that meant. I felt a tightening in my chest, like someone had accidentally pressed a button and the sound was somewhere inside me. I clicked on the link again. It was terrifying. At first it seemed like it was the same yard, but now I could clearly see that it was changing, as if some details were starting to be added. I felt my hands start to shake. I thought about stopping watching, but my gaze was already glued to the screen. And then it happened. I saw something new, something that made me feel like I was part of something else. I sat in silence, staring at the screen as the footage of that yard flashed by again. I couldn't figure out what was going on, but there was one thing I couldn't take my eyes off it. With each new frame, the image became a little brighter, and the details became clearer. New elements appeared in the landscape of the yard, branches, some tools that hadn't been visible before. But the strangest thing was that an aura of uncertainty seemed to emanate from these objects, as if everything around me was changing its shape, absorbing some hidden emotions that I couldn't make out. The outside world ceased to exist at this point. I was completely immersed in this strange video. Attention to details that had previously seemed insignificant now captivated me. Questions began to torment me relentlessly. Why was this video continuing? What was this annoying feeling I was experiencing? I hadn't felt so trapped in a long time. None of these images made sense, but their incessant flow kept me staring at the screen. When the video finally started loading again, I decided to stand up and pause. My hands were shaking, and I was trying not to give in to the strange feeling that I needed to understand what was happening as quickly as possible. But my entire reaction was instinctive. There was no logical explanation for why I was continuing to stare at that courtyard. I glanced at the screen, then looked away again. I turned on the light, trying to calm myself down a little, but the feeling of uneasiness wouldn't leave me. Every thought tried to get rid of this obsessive feeling, but it held me tighter. I went to the window, slid out of the chair, and looked out the window, trying to see anything familiar that could distract my mind from the video. But the evening was pitch black, and the fog that shrouded everything around made every step along the street mysterious and empty, as if the world outside my house did not exist. I went back to the computer and opened the video again, unable to forget about that yard. That strange, empty scene still haunted me. I sat there wondering why I kept looking at that screen. At one point, I thought I saw something new. A strange object that hadn't been noticeable before suddenly appeared in the yard. It was something like an old garden gnome, only much uglier. Its expressive eyes seemed alien, and it seemed out of place in that squalid place. This strange gnome just stood in the corner of the yard, as if he was watching everything that was happening. I felt the tension building. My breathing became heavy, and a wave of cold ran down my spine. I didn't know why, but in that moment it became clear to me I had to stop. I couldn't continue watching. I tried to close the tab, but the screen still stayed in place and the video continued playing. I knew something was wrong. There was no logical explanation for why I kept watching, but I couldn't stop. Something inside me was resisting. It was as if I was forced to follow this path, following a voice that told me that this was not just a joke, but something more important. My mind tried to find some kind of justification for what was happening, but all my attempts were uselessly met with a reality that defied explanation. A few minutes later, a new frame appeared on the screen again. The same ugly figure was standing in the yard, but now its eyes were directed straight at the camera, as if it intended to look at me. My heart was pounding in my chest, and my hands, as usual, began to shake. I felt a chill run down my skin, and then looked at the screen again, not knowing what awaited me. I couldn't understand what was happening with this video. Why did I keep watching if I felt it could be dangerous? With each passing minute, the feeling grew that what I was watching had some deeper meaning, something I shouldn't know. I tried to push these thoughts away, but they became more and more insistent. My eyes were still glued to the screen, but I couldn't afford to delve any further into it. I opened a new window and tried to search for information on the matter. I decided to check if anyone had experienced something similar. I typed in the search term weird video ads that grab attention, hoping for at least a small clue. But the results were disappointing. At that point, I felt myself getting uncomfortable, and I was overcome by the feeling that I shouldn't have been looking for these answers. It was too late. I looked back at the screen. The video was still playing, and now, in addition to the gnome, I noticed something else strange. There were vague shapes along the fence, just at the edge. I couldn't make out what they were, but something about the figures made me feel like I wasn't alone. My breath caught in my throat. It was as if someone was watching me. The seconds dragged on like hours, and I tried to close the page again, but it didn't work. The video didn't stop. No matter how hard I tried to turn it off, the screen kept filling with the same images. What did that mean? Why couldn't I just stop watching? Several minutes passed, but the video continued to play. It was impossible. I tried to find some way to turn off the stream, but nothing worked. I clicked on tabs, tried to close the browser, reboot the system. Nothing. The screen remained in place, as if it was connected to something much more powerful than just a technical error. The anxiety continued to grow. I had to stop to get out of this state, but I couldn't. My whole body seemed to freeze in that state where reality lost its outlines, and this video became the only existing world. I felt my thoughts becoming more and more uncontrollable, as if they were absorbing me, sucking out the last drop of reason. I stood up, looked out the window again, trying to get some sense of normalcy, to return to the real world, but the fog that shrouded the street was haunting me. Even in the complete darkness, it created a strange feeling that the world at the other end of the street was as empty as the yard on the screen. I hated this fog. It seemed to absorb all sound, creating a complete silence that whispered to me that nothing was safe. There could be no accidents. There could be nothing accidental in what was happening now. Suddenly, the screen filled with footage of the same yard again, but now I noticed something more than just the usual objects and scenery. There, in the background, along the fence, in a dark corner, a figure appeared, a figure that seemed to have been there all along, but now it looked completely different. The silhouette became clearer. Indistinct and stretched out, it seemed not to be a person, but something else. Maybe it was an illusion, but I distinctly felt my heart squeeze. The silhouette didn't move, didn't change, but I knew it was there. It stood still, and although the camera couldn't capture the details, I felt like it was looking right at me. It wasn't just a feeling. It was a clear knowledge that someone or something was watching me. I opened a new window, intending to search again. My hand shook as I typed in the search query, unusual video ads with figures in the backyard, but the results were empty, as before. No information, just the usual sites related to SectV cameras, which again seemed out of place in this context. I looked at the time. It was already late at night. It was strange. I didn't remember so much time passing. I had the feeling that I was losing control. It felt like I was part of some terrifying experiment, part of something bigger that I couldn't understand. I looked back at the screen. The footage of the courtyard continued to flicker. Something had changed. At first it had seemed like the entire scene was just an empty background, but now I saw the figure in the dark corner of the courtyard begin to move. Its outlines became clearer, and now I realized that it was not just an unspoken presence, but something much more real. It was a human figure, tall and dark, but it moved too smoothly, as if its body was artificially taut and gliding along the ground. I felt panic creeping up on me. I knew this shouldn't be happening. I should close the window, forget about it, go back to normal, but something was holding me back. This strange gnome, who had been standing motionless in his place in the corner of the yard, now seemed even more sinister. His eyes, which had previously seemed merely detailed, were now beginning to glow with a faint, greenish light, as if they had a life of their own. I froze, unable to tear my eyes away. My breathing became rapid, and I felt a cold sweat covering my body. It became difficult for me to breathe. I tried to switch to something else, tried to close all the windows again, but I couldn't tear my eyes away from the screen. Now I was sure that something was happening. This wasn't just a video. This wasn't just a coincidence. I tried to close the window again, but it wouldn't budge. The screen continued to show footage from the yard, and the figure moved closer, gliding across the grass like a shadow, getting closer with each step. I couldn't understand why I was so scared. It was just a video, but I felt like what I was seeing could affect my reality. The figure approached the camera, and I felt my heart tighten. It seemed to me that she was looking straight into my eyes. Those eyes, empty and dark as the night itself, seemed alive to me. Too alive. I jumped up from my chair, unable to sit any longer. I felt panic seize me, and finally I abruptly closed the window. But that figure, that dark silhouette, did not leave. I knew it would remain there watching. I looked at my hands. They were still shaking. My mind tried to find an explanation for all this, but I couldn't. What I had just seen didn't fit into the framework of common sense. There was nothing to do but check all my windows again and make sure everything was closed. But I still felt uneasy. The feeling that someone was watching me did not go away. I looked around the room again until my gaze fell on the screen. The video began playing again. But now, instead of looking at me, the figure was looking straight at the screen. The words, "Are you looking for the truth?" flashed across the screen, and I couldn't understand how I could escape from it. I sat in the dark room, my gaze fixed on the screen. The words, "Are you looking for the truth?" continued to flicker across the screen, mocking me. Something inside me was pounding, and I could feel panic clenching my chest. The question seemed simple, but in that moment it took on a strange, ominous significance. Truth. What did that even mean in the context of what I had just seen? That figure in the corner of the yard, those eyes that seemed not just to look but to understand, to observe, to wait. I didn't know how to answer that question. I didn't know if I wanted to look for the truth. I tried closing the tabs again, restarting the browser, but all attempts were in vain. The screen in front of me continued to show the empty yard and the figure, who was now standing right by the fence. It seemed to be getting closer, and with every step, with every movement, something inside me, something dark and undefined, became heavier. This was not just a video, it was something much bigger. I tried to force myself to stand up, to walk away from the screen, but my legs felt like they were frozen and my arms wouldn't obey me. It wasn't physical strength, it was something inside me that was holding me there. I couldn't tear my eyes away from the monitor, as if it had become a part of me. I saw shadows swaying around the figure, and with every movement, with every frame, I felt more and more like something was taking over my mind. I was starting to breathe hard. I knew it wasn't just an ad. I was sure it wasn't just a video. It was something bigger, something that was seeping into my thoughts, into my soul. I could feel the fear starting to seep into every corner of my mind, consuming me, making me feel helpless. I tried to think logically. I should have closed the browser, turned off the computer, and gone to bed. But instead, I sat here, gripping the chair, staring at the screen. I had long forgotten how long I had been staring at it. Maybe an hour, maybe two. It didn't matter. It was all starting to make no sense. The figure on the screen took a step forward. Its movements were slow, as if it sensed me, as if it knew I was watching. I knew it was impossible. It was just a video. It was just an image. But deep down, I knew it was all too real to be just my imagination. I swayed in my chair, unable to bear the tension. My mind raced, searching for an answer, but it didn't come. I tried to remember what I knew about these videos, about these situations, but nothing came to mind. Only emptiness. And then, like in a nightmare, I realized that something had changed. The figure was no longer just a shadow. It had become more detailed. I could see its outline, its clothes, its movements. It was getting closer and closer, and its gaze could not help but be directed at me. I felt how its eyes penetrated my soul, how it understood me, read me, as if its intentions were to have me. I opened a new window and typed into the search engine, what to do when online advertising becomes too real. But of course, nothing came up. Instead, the same question appeared again. Are you looking for the truth? And the answer I still couldn't find. I stood up and walked to the window. It didn't help. Everything around me was swallowed by a dark fog. I looked at the screen and again noticed the figure moving step by step, approaching the camera. I felt a growing sense of unease creeping up on me. This wasn't just a video. This was something that had penetrated the real world, and it knew more about me than I did. Suddenly, the screen went black and I was left in complete darkness. I didn't even know what had happened. Anxiety filled my mind and I shuddered. I looked at my phone but couldn't find anything that could help me. Everything looked the same. Everything was the same as before, but now I felt like something was different, something that couldn't be explained. I tried to turn on the computer again, but the same scene appeared on the screen again. The same yard, the same figure by the fence, and those eyes. They were looking at me, right into me, I knew I couldn't escape it. My breathing quickened and I felt the darkness closing in on me. I couldn't control my thoughts. They became chaotic, incoherent, as if something inside me was losing its shape, becoming alien. The figure took another step. Now it was only a few meters from the camera. I could see its face. It was a person, a woman, but it was distorted. Its face was too pale, and its eyes were too big. But they were looking at me. I knew it was me she was looking at, not the screen. And at that moment I realized that this wasn't just a video. This wasn't just an ad. This wasn't just some mistake or accident. I was part of something, and I couldn't get out. I tried to break free from it. I tried to scream, but nothing happened. I was trapped in this world, and all I could do was watch the figure approach, move towards me. I sat in a dark room, and the only thing I could hear was my own pulse, which beat in unison with the ticking of the screen. I woke up with a sharp sense of anxiety. I lay in the dark, completely unsure of how I had fallen asleep or what had happened to my thoughts. My mind was a blank white canvas, with no clear memories, just anxiety and a feeling that something was wrong. I got out of bed, tried to calm the fear that was gripping me, and tried to realize where I was. Everything was quiet, too quiet. My hands were shaking, and I had to take a few deep breaths to calm myself down. I struggled out of bed and walked to the window. The moonlight filtered through the thin curtains, casting shifting shadows on the floor. Everything was familiar, just like before, but this restless silence felt alien, strange and unnatural. I stood there, looking out the window, trying to collect my thoughts. The night was unusually quiet. Not even the crickets were chirping. There was no sound from the neighbors or passing cars. I looked again at the computer screen that sat on the table. It was turned off, and this could not help but surprise me. The last time I left it, it was showing that terrible scene, that woman in distress, and that figure approaching. The fear was back. My fingers reached for the keys, but I hesitated. I didn't know what to expect. Maybe I would see something even more terrifying, or maybe the screen would remain blank, as if this had all been just a nightmare. I wasn't ready to find out. With great effort, I turned on the computer. It took a long time to boot up, as always, but this time the process felt strange. As if something was wrong, as if someone was watching this, watching me turn it on, watching it start working. And then, finally, the screen loaded. I knew it wasn't going to be okay. I didn't want to watch what was going to happen next, but I felt like I couldn't look away. I felt my mind racing to find out what had happened, why this ad had appeared so intrusively in my life. As expected, the same scene appeared before me. An empty yard, white fences, an ugly garden gnome that seemed to be part of this nightmare. But this time, something was wrong. The video began with the camera showing only an empty plot of land, but as soon as I started watching, everything began to change. Some strange shadows began to move in the background, and as always, they had no clear outlines. I could not understand what exactly they were. Not people, not animals. They were just figures that moved like shadows, like something unclear, blurry. But they were all approaching the house, to the house that I now perceived as part of this terrible world. My hands started shaking again, and my heart was beating in my chest, unable to bear the weight. I tried to tear myself away from the screen, but I couldn't. This scene was pulling me in, as if it were my punishment. At first I thought it might be some kind of virus or program that was affecting my brain, but over time I realized that it was much worse. I watched as something appeared on the screen, and this vague image, like a human figure, gradually began to appear, to come closer. I could no longer tell if it was a living person or just a shadow, but it was becoming clearer and clearer. It was terrifying. I couldn't tell what scared me more, the fact that the video itself didn't stop, or the fact that the figure on the screen began to act as if it was connected to this world, my world. Then a new text appeared, as always, in the form of a caption on the screen. "You're already here, aren't you?" It was like a punch in the face. It became difficult to breathe. I felt fear gripping me, but I couldn't tear my eyes away. It was the same question I had once seen on that sponsored post. Are you looking for the truth? The answer was already obvious. This wasn't just an ad. This wasn't just a weird video. This was so much more than I could have imagined. I leaned back, trying to turn off the computer, but it didn't work. The screen kept on, and I could feel the fog growing in my head. My hands were sweating, and my whole world felt lost. With each passing moment, I became more and more aware that I had become part of something I couldn't escape. And then a new figure appeared, a man in a dark hood. He stood in the shadows. Everything around him was dark and indistinct, but his figure was distinct. He moved as if his steps were part of the video itself, part of what was happening on the screen. I watched in horror as he came closer, and a knife appeared in his hand. He froze, and at that moment everything around him became silent. There were no more sounds, no more movement. There was only this silence, which became more and more viscous. And in that moment I realized I was trapped, a trap of my own making, and now I couldn't get out. There are no words to describe that moment when you realize you can't get out. It's like an eclipse of the mind, when any attempt to resist only deepens your helplessness. All I knew was that I was here in this house, in this yard. I didn't understand what was happening, but I knew that this wasn't just some dream or a failed advertising campaign. It was alive, it was real, and it was watching me. As the hooded figure stepped forward, I began to breathe hard. I felt my fingers curl into fists, as if searching for something to grab onto. But there was none. There was nothing. I stood there like a cornered animal who suddenly realized his time was up. The video continued. The hooded man slowly approached the woman, who was still lying on the ground, her arms mangled. She was still, like she was dead. I knew this wasn't just an image, not just a scene from some horrible movie. I was trapped, a trap created by something or someone watching my every move. My eyes tried to follow this man's every move. I tried to figure out what he was going to do. But every moment seemed slow, every gesture terribly precise. He approached the woman, grabbed her by the hair, and his gaze seemed to pierce the screen, right into me. I felt a chill run down my spine, as if he was really there next to me. In that moment, I realized I wasn't just watching a video. I was part of it. I was a trapped viewer, like some sinister play I couldn't change. Each moment dragged on, excruciatingly long. I couldn't tear myself away from the screen. I knew I had to stop it, that I should stop watching, but I couldn't. The man raised the knife again, his movements precise and cool, as if he had done this 1,000 times. He stood over her, raising the knife to strike. I closed my eyes, hoping it would stop, hoping it would just go away. But it didn't. I opened my eyes again and saw him again. He was still there, and with each passing moment he became more real. And then, just when it seemed like I couldn't take it anymore, everything changed again. The screen lit up, and I was back in my house, but now something was wrong. The room was too quiet, too muffled. The wind that used to bring me coolness from the window no longer moved a single curtain. I froze, looking around. This place had become alien. Everything had become alien. I stood up from my chair and felt my legs buckle slightly. Not from fear, but from exhaustion. This situation had left me exhausted, not just physically but emotionally. I walked around the room, feeling like something was wrong. But what? Why did I feel like someone was watching me? Why had this video, this hooded man, become part of my world? I started walking around the room, slowly at first, trying to comprehend what was happening, but with each step the feeling of being under someone's control grew stronger. I approached the window, but just like in that nightmare, the fog was already behind it. I couldn't see anything. I looked at the screen again, and then I noticed it. On the screen, where there had been a shadow, there was now my own silhouette. I froze, unable to move. It was me in the mirror, but not quite me. I watched as this figure began to move, and with each step it came closer to me. I was sure that I had not moved. This couldn't be my reflection. This couldn't be some kind of dream. The figure moved toward me with frightening precision, just like the man in the video. I tried to move, even just a little, but my body felt alien. I couldn't move. I could do nothing but watch as this thing, that's what it was, came toward me. But everything changed when I realized it wasn't coming. It was already here. The moment our eyes met was the moment when everything around me stopped. Time didn't exist. I realized that I couldn't separate myself from this reality anymore. I was in this world. I was here, among them. And the only thing left was to accept that I couldn't get out. The mystery I had been trying to solve was now a part of me. I stood there, unable to move, and all I knew was that this wasn't a dream. This was reality, and it was far worse than any nightmare. I felt the air around me become thick, as if space was shrinking, and my movements became slower and slower. Every second felt like an eternity. I tried to close my eyes to try to break out of this state, but I couldn't. It was like I was trapped, and now there was no turning back. My reflection in the mirror was not me. I was not who I wanted to be. It was unnatural, disfigured, like the figure on the screen. I tried to tell myself that it was just psychosis, that I was out of balance after the night's experiences, but deep down I knew that was not true. I was trapped, and there was no way to escape. The shadow that had been looking at me began to move. It took a step, and I felt the cold air envelop me, as if it had already touched me. But it was not just cold, it was ice, penetrating the very soul. Something that took away not only warmth, but consciousness. I tried to remember how I had gotten into this situation, what had led me to this. To remember that moment when I had simply clicked on a strange ad, but now it seemed unimportant. Like everything else that had once seemed significant, I was nothing more than a pawn in this game, and I could no longer believe that I would be able to get out. The figure in the mirror came toward me, her face hidden by her hood, but I felt her presence as clearly as if she were in my skin. I couldn't tear myself away from the gaze she directed at me. I couldn't understand what she wanted, but I knew that if I took one step, if I even tried to fight, it would all end. And in that moment, I realized the struggle was futile. I could no longer fight what had become my reality. All that was left was to follow, to watch, to be a part of it. I was not an ordinary person and probably never had been. I was part of something bigger, and this force, this shadow, this hooded entity, all of it was an integral part of me. I was connected to it, and I could not escape it. The mirror had become cloudy in the meantime, and I felt my own outlines begin to blur. I realized with horror that I was disappearing. I was turning into a shadow, like all those figures in the video that I had once seen. Everything around me began to disappear, dissolving into some endless foggy emptiness. My mind, which had been clear until recently, lost the last vestiges of awareness. I was not prepared for what awaited me, but it was inevitable. I felt my body disappearing, becoming part of this abyss, part of the shadow that has neither form nor name. I am dissolving. I no longer exist in this world, but I do not disappear completely. Everything I once knew about myself dissolved into this shadow. I became part of something that had no boundaries. I was forgotten, insignificant, and all of this became part of the endless cycle that was once my life. Frozen in this state, I realized that there was no end. This was not a completion, not a point at the end of the road. This was a new beginning. I was reborn, but not as a person. I became part of this dark force, part of something much older and more powerful. And perhaps in the future I will watch someone as they did to me. I couldn't say it was liberating, but I wasn't myself anymore. I was theirs. And as I disappeared into the fog, I knew it wasn't over. It was just the beginning of a new game.